The 2026 NATO summit concluded in Ankara on Wednesday, and this year, one phrase has been making the rounds: NATO 3.0. In the wake of the Cold War, NATO updated its readiness plans in a shift often described as NATO 2.0. This year, Secretary General Mark Rutte described 3.0 as a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO, one less dependent on the United States. Yet, US President Donald Trump still dominated the tone. Yes, he still wants Greenland. No, he doesn't want any trade with Spain, which he called a country of hopeless bad people. He also insulted France, Germany, Italy and the UK for declining to join his war on Iran. But he took a very different tone with the summit host, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, praising what he called the loyalty of the Turks compared to other NATO allies. This was a significant summit for Turkey, the first time it hosted NATO since 2004. So has NATO revived Turkey's place in Europe? And has Turkey revived NATO from the disinterest of Donald Trump? Joining me now from Washington is MEE journalist Yasmine El-Sabawi. Yasmine, welcome to MEE Live. So Trump says he's removing Turkey from a US blacklist that he himself imposed. This was because Turkey acquired Russian S-400 defense systems, very controversial given Russia's relationship with NATO. How significant is this move by Trump?
It's hugely significant. And look, it's not like he hasn't signaled this before, but what was different here is that he sat right next to President Erdogan. He looked at reporters and he said, "We're going to remove the sanctions. It's time. This is a valued friend and this is what we're going to do." And so it was quite explicit. These were also sanctions that were put in place during Trump's first term back in 2019. This was, as you mentioned, because Turkey acquired the S-400 Russian defense system. They say it's because the US didn't supply them with their own defense system. They would have preferred to take it from a NATO ally, but of course, having a Russian system in place, according to the Americans, becomes a concern because then any program that Turkey is in that is a NATO program, such as the F-35, those elite fighter jet training programs, that would potentially expose some U.S. intelligence, I should say, to Moscow. And that is something the U.S. wants to avoid. But now as Trump leans into that personal relationship with Erdogan, becoming perhaps the most pro-Turkey president that the U.S. has ever seen, he's certainly leaning into that, looking to move it through Congress before the midterm elections, when we expect Democrats to take hold of both chambers on Capitol Hill.
Wow, so if Turkey finds its way back onto the exclusive F-35s program as a result of this, presumably Israel won't be very happy.
No, not at all. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has made this very clear. He has said Israel must maintain air superiority in the region. He went as far in a Fox and Friends interview last week to say that to align Turkey with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is shorthand in Israel for links to terrorism. He has said that Turkey does not share the values that are within NATO. And so that is something that surely the pro-Israeli lobby here in the US will be pushing, especially among Democrats. Democrats is where you may see more of the pushback when it comes to removing Turkey from the sanctions list, bringing them back into the F-35 fold, because Republicans at this point, as we've seen, tend to go with what the president wants, particularly on foreign policy, even if there is some mild pushback. At the end of the day, they're seeking the president's endorsement. This is an election year for members of Congress. The president remains the kingmaker.
Now, at the heart of this story is this intriguing solidarity between Trump and Erdogan. You said Trump might be the most pro-Turkey president the US has ever seen. He said that he only showed up to NATO for his friend Erdogan. What is at the heart of this relationship? Why do this pair seem to get on so well?
I think you see the term strongman thrown around a lot, which very much describes who Trump is, very much describes Erdogan, who, of course, began as prime minister, became the president, has been in power for 20 years. Most of what he says goes, much as Trump would like. We've seen Trump in the past, perhaps not so jokingly, suggest that he would like to be president for life, as some of the other leaders are. He mentioned President Xi of China. So in that vein, he does see a similarity. These are men that want to be in place for a very long time. He sees Erdogan as someone who's also reliable because he has been in power for so long, whereas with Europe, with so many other prime ministers, all it takes is one vote of non-confidence and they're out, and that triggers an election. But in Turkey, that's been very different. The president has found himself with someone who doesn't criticize his policies as much as Western Europe does.
Now, mainly, in the meantime, NATO's European members, the democratic ones in particular, they are treading very thin ice with Trump, who's been threatening to withdraw US troops from Europe. He reiterated his desire to own Greenland. Amid this strife, is Erdogan becoming a little bit of a lifeline for NATO?
Certainly, and you've seen that with the French also moving a little closer to Turkey. And they were major critics of Turkey's, some of its democratic backsliding, some of aspects of Erdogan's rule, where they had said that he had ruled with an iron fist, that he's clamping down on any critics. Because at the end of the day, when the United States moves closer toward an ally, it's hard for the rest of the alliance not to go in the same direction. Washington very much has dictated NATO's direction. And you've seen that the president also mentioned to allies that that's why he also wants them to step up their contributions to defense spending in NATO, because the fact is the U.S. has led the way financially and politically within this alliance. And Turkey, of course, remains just geographically incredibly important. It has also stepped up as a power player because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's orchestrated some prisoner swaps, and it wants to play a larger role given it has maintained a friendship with both sides.
Now, you mentioned that in the past, Europe has been quite critical of Turkey, particularly Erdogan, due to his increasingly repressive treatment of the domestic opposition. Now, this summit was accompanied by a pretty harsh crackdown on protesters and even potential protesters who might appear at NATO. So did that criticism appear, or were these European critics quieter this time around?
We did see a reporter put this question to the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte just yesterday on Wednesday, saying, you know, you sat right there next to Donald Trump. Why not bring up some of the problematic issues? Why not criticize some of his policies if you feel so strongly about them? Because the reporter essentially said, you know, you sit next to him, all you do is praise the man, and Rutte only responded that it's important to praise the United States when necessary. But we also know this is how you bring Trump on side. And one of the key words that he used to describe President Erdogan and Turkey is loyal. And that's incredibly important to someone like President Trump, who also applies the same standard domestically in the United States.
Now, efforts to prevent unrest were not entirely successful in Ankara. Anti-NATO protests took place not just in Ankara, also in Istanbul, in Izmir. There were labor unions, there were NGOs critical of military budgets increasing. But there was also another issue in play. That was Gaza. Erdogan presents himself as a champion of the Palestinian cause. This should, by many accounts, put him at loggerheads with Trump. Why is Gaza not more of an issue between the pair?
This is what makes this relationship so fascinating. We've seen the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan sort of package the Gaza issue as something that the U.S. and Turkey are aligned on, which is quite fascinating. But he mentioned this just after the meeting, or the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace earlier this year. Turkey was one of the first signatories. It didn't manage to insert its troops into this ISF, or the International Stabilization Force that the Board of Peace intends to have in Gaza. But it does want to play a bigger role, and to do that, you have to stay in Trump's good orbit. And part of that is about bringing up the commonalities, staying on message, reminding him that he is in fact somebody who has created peace, has brought about the ceasefire. This is the narrative you have to craft around Trump. This is the narrative he wants around himself. And much of how he works is based on personal relationships, which comes back to Erdogan, and also the cultural notion of within Turkey of maintaining the personal relationships to eventually get what you want.
Thank you. And now finally, let's talk about Syria. There was another big key winner at NATO, and that was Syria, with the US now moving to delist it as a state sponsor of terrorism. Tell us about this. How significant is this?
It's hugely significant. I would argue it is perhaps the most impactful deliverable from the NATO summit. This came right after a meeting between President Trump and President Shara. President Trump, as you had mentioned earlier, praised him in a way we haven't seen him talk about any Western European leader or any other ally, frankly, to call him highly respected, to call him fantastic. And remember, a year and a half ago, this was somebody who had a $10 million bounty on his head. But the swift embrace of Shara has been nothing short of remarkable. Perhaps no other president would have dared to take this on, but Trump has lifted economic sanctions, those really crippling Caesar sanctions, and now we see him beginning the formal process to delist Syria from the state sponsors of terrorism list. It only has 4 countries on it. It's North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and Syria. So this is really something that's historic. It's rare, but it will have to go through Congress. We don't expect a lot of opposition here. There is bipartisan support for this in order to spur private investment and to just bring Syria back up to where it belongs.
Certainly a huge development. Yasmine El-Sabawi, thank you so much for your time.